The restaurant was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop or a trigger click. Standing at the head of the table was Don Salvatore Moretti, the most ruthless capo in New York, a man who hadn't smiled in 20 years. His guards had their hands inside their jackets, eyes locked on the trembling waitress holding a tray of wine. She was supposed to be invisible. She was supposed to just pour the Chianti and leave. But she had just done the unthinkable. She spoke to the Don. And she didn't just speak English or even standard Italian. She spoke a dialect so old, so rare, and so specific to a tiny, blood-soaked village in Sicily that it shouldn't have existed in America. The Don's eyes went wide. His son, the dangerous Lorenzo Moretti, stood up, knocking his chair over. Everyone thought she was about to die. But what happened next would bring the entire underworld to its knees. Louisa adjusted her apron for the 10th time, her hands shaking so badly she thought she might drop the tray before she even left the kitchen. The air in Vino and Verita, usually warm and smelling of garlic and roasted tomatoes, was cold tonight. It was a coldness that came from fear. "Louisa, listen to me," Giovanni the owner hissed, grabbing her shoulder. His face was pale beads of sweat standing out on his bald head. "Do not look them in the eye. Do not speak unless spoken to. Place the plates from the left, clear from the right, and for the love of God, be invisible." "I know, Mr. Giovanni," Louisa whispered, tucked her loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I'll be careful." Tonight, the restaurant was closed to the public. The blinds were drawn, the sign on the door flipped to "Private Event." The Moretti family was coming. In the city, the name Moretti was whispered, never shouted. They owned the docks, the unions, and half the politicians. But tonight, they were just hungry men with short tempers. Louisa was only covering this shift because the head waiter, Marco, had mysteriously come down with the flu an hour after the reservation was booked. Louisa suspected Marco wasn't sick. He was smart. He knew that when Don Salvatore Moretti dined, mistakes weren't punished with a bad tip. They were punished with broken fingers. "They're here," the sous chef whispered from the window. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb in perfect unison. The doors opened, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from anxious to suffocating. First came the security men with earpieces and bulges under their expensive jackets. They swept the room with eyes that missed nothing. Then came Lorenzo Moretti. Louisa watched from the crack in the kitchen door. He was terrifyingly beautiful. Tall, with shoulders that filled out his bespoke suit, and eyes the color of dark espresso, intense, calculating, and utterly void of warmth. He moved like a panther, confident and lethal. He was the prince of the city, the man who ran the day-to-day operations. But everyone stiffened when the last man exited the center vehicle. Don Salvatore, the old lion. He walked with a cane, not out of weakness, but as an accessory of power. His hair was silver swept back, and his face was a map of old wars. "Table 1. Lorenzo commanded, his voice deep and smooth, like velvet over gravel. As they sat, the tension was palpable. Giovanni was shaking as he poured the water. He spilled a single drop on the tablecloth near Salvatore's hand. The room froze. Salvatore looked at the wet spot, then up at Giovanni. He didn't say a word. He just tapped his cane on the floor. Tap, tap. I am so sorry, Don Moretti," Giovanni stammered. "I will change it immediately." "Leave it," Lorenzo said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just bring the wine, the vintage we discussed." Giovanni scrambled back to the kitchen, nearly colliding with Louisa. "Take the wine," he wheezed, shoving the expensive bottle of 1995 Brunello and a decanter into her hands. "I can't go back out there. My heart. I can't breathe." Louisa took the heavy tray. She had no choice. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She was a nobody, a 22-year-old orphan, working 2 jobs to pay for a tiny studio apartment. She had nothing to do with the mafia. She just needed to pour the wine. She walked out onto the floor. The sound of her orthopedic work shoes on the hardwood seemed deafeningly loud. There were 6 men at the table. They stopped talking as she approached. Lorenzo Moretti turned his gaze toward her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of expensive cologne tobacco and danger. "Open it," Lorenzo ordered, not looking at her face, but watching her hands. Louisa deftly used the corkscrew. She had done this 1,000 times. The pop was soft. She began to decant the wine, her movements fluid and practiced. "Father," Lorenzo said, turning to the old man, "the shipment from the coast is delayed. The Russians are pushing back on the tax." Salvatore grunted, looking bored. He looked around the restaurant with disdain. "This city has lost its respect. In the old country, a man knew his place. Here, everyone is a cowboy." He spoke in Italian, but his accent was rough, Americanized by decades in New York. One of the bodyguards, a man named Vinny, laughed. "The old country is dirt and donkey's boss. You're the king of New York." Salvatore's eyes narrowed. He hated when his men disrespected his roots, even if he hadn't visited Sicily in 40 years. "You know nothing, Vincent. You eat pasta from a box and call yourself Italian. You don't know the smell of the lemon trees in the valley of Corleone. Before the rain." Louisa's hand froze mid-pour. Corleone. She knew that smell. She had never been there, but her nonna. The woman who raised her in a tiny apartment in Queens had described it to her every night as a bedtime story. Nonna didn't teach Louisa standard Italian. She taught her the dialect of the hills, the old tongue that barely existed anymore, a mix of Italian Arabic influences and local slang that was impenetrable to outsiders. Louisa finished pouring Salvatore's glass. She placed it gently in front of him. She should have walked away. She should have kept her head down. But seeing the sadness in the old lion's eyes, a strange impulse took over her. It was a memory of her grandmother, lonely and dying, missing a home she could never return to. Without thinking, Louisa looked at the Don. "Usangu non si fa acqua, Don Salvatore, e l'usuli di deda terra abbrucia ancora enta lupettu." Blood does not become water, Don Salvatore, and the sun of that land still burns inside the chest. The silence that followed was violent. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Lorenzo's head snapped up. His hand moved instinctively toward his waistband where his gun was hidden. The bodyguards stood up so fast their chairs scraped loudly against the floor. "What did you say?" Lorenzo barked, his eyes blazing. "Who sent you?" But Salvatore didn't move. He sat frozen, his hand gripping the stem of the wine glass so hard his knuckles were white. He stared at Louisa not with anger, but with a look of absolute terrifying shock. "Sit down!" Salvatore roared at his men. His voice shook the walls. The guards hesitated, but sat. Lorenzo remained standing tense as a coiled spring. "Father, she's speaking in code. No one speaks that dialect. It's dead. She's a spy." I said, "Sit, Lorenzo." Salvatore slammed his hand on the table. Lorenzo sat, but his eyes never left Luisa's face. He looked at her as if he was trying to dissect her soul. Salvatore turned his chair slowly to face Luisa. He looked her up and down, seeing her cheap uniform, her scuffed shoes, and her terrified brown eyes. "Piccerida," little one Salvatore whispered, his voice trembling. "Who taught you those words?" Luisa hugged the empty wine tray to her chest as a shield. My nonna, sir." "Your nonna," Salvatore repeated. "What is her name?" "Isabella," Luisa whispered. "Isabella Rossi." The color drained from Salvatore's face. It was as if he had seen a ghost. He looked at Lorenzo, then back at Luisa. "Clear the restaurant," Salvatore said softly. "Father," Lorenzo asked. "Clear the restaurant." Salvatore screamed, sweeping the expensive wine glass off the table. It shattered, sending red wine splashing like blood across the pristine white floor. "Everyone out, except the girl. And Lorenzo." Giovanni ran out the back door. The sous chef fled. The bodyguards stepped outside to guard the perimeter. Suddenly, Luisa was alone in the dim room with the two most dangerous men in the city, and she had no idea that by speaking those few words, she had just unlocked a war that had been buried for 50 years. Luisa stood paralyzed among the shards of glass. The smell of the spilled wine was overpowering, mixing with the scent of fear radiating from her own skin. Lorenzo stood up and walked around the table. He moved slowly now, like a predator circling prey that had nowhere to run. He stopped inches from her. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. Up close, his eyes were mesmerizingly complex flecks of gold hidden in the dark brown. But they were cold. "Do you know who we are?" Lorenzo asked, his voice low. "Yes," Luisa breathed. "And yet you speak a dead dialect to my father. A dialect that only 5 families in Sicily ever spoke. A dialect that has been erased." He stepped closer. "Who are you working for, the Genovese, the Russians?" "No one," Luisa cried, backing up until her waist hit a side table. "I'm just a waitress, I swear." "Lorenzo enough," Salvatore said. The old man sounded tired, aged by 10 years in the last 5 minutes. "She is not a spy. Look at her face. Look at her eyes." Lorenzo looked. He really looked. He studied the curve of her jaw, the shape of her brow, the stubborn set of her mouth, even as her chin trembled. There was something familiar there, something that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite place. "Bring her a chair," Salvatore commanded. Lorenzo grabbed a wooden chair and spun it around. "Sit." Luisa sat clutching her hands in her lap. "Isabella Rossi," Salvatore said, testing the name on his tongue like a prayer. "She died last year," Luisa said, a tear slipping down her cheek. She never told me much about her past, just stories about the hills. She said she had to leave in a hurry. She said it wasn't safe." Salvatore closed his eyes. "No, it wasn't." He opened his eyes and looked at Lorenzo. "You have heard me speak of the great betrayal of 1975. Lorenzo nodded slowly. "When the clans turned on each other. When you lost everything." "Not everything," Salvatore whispered, looking at Luisa. "I thought I lost Isabella. She was not my wife, Lorenzo. Your mother, God rest her soul, was a political union. But Isabella, she was the daughter of the baker in our village. We were young, foolish." Luisa's eyes widened. Was he saying, "She disappeared one night," Salvatore continued. I was told the rival clan, the Genovese, had taken her, killed her to hurt me. I burned 3 of their warehouses to the ground in retaliation. I started a war that lasted a decade because of her death." He leaned forward, his calloused hand reaching out to touch Louisa's hand. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "But she wasn't dead," Salvatore whispered. She ran to protect the child." Lorenzo's head snapped toward his father. "Child? You never said there was a child." "I didn't know," Salvatore said softly. He looked at Luisa with a mixture of awe and grief. "Isabella ran to America. She changed her name. She hid in Queens. She lived a life of poverty to keep the child safe from my world." He looked at Luisa intensely. "Your father, who was he?" Luisa shook her head. "I never knew him. Nonna said he died before I was born. My mother died giving birth to me. Nonna raised me alone." Salvatore looked at Lorenzo. "Do the math, Renzo." Lorenzo did the math. The timeline lined up perfectly. If Isabella was pregnant when she fled in 1975, that child would have been Luisa's mother. Which made Luisa— "She's your granddaughter," Lorenzo said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The room went silent again. Luisa felt lightheaded. The Mafia Don was her grandfather. This was insane. This was a soap opera. This couldn't be her life. I think there has been a mistake," Luisa stammered, standing up. "I just want to go home. Please, I won't tell anyone what happened here." Lorenzo stepped in her path, blocking her exit. "You can't go home." "Why not?" Luisa demanded, finding a spark of courage. "Because," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "if my father recognized that dialect, others will too. If you really are Isabella's bloodline, you are a walking target. The Genovese family is still out there. If they find out Salvatore Moretti has a secret heir, a vulnerability, they will use you to get to him. Or they will kill you just to finish the job they started 50 years ago." "He is right," Salvatore said, standing up with effort. "You cannot return to your apartment. Not tonight. Not ever." "You're kidnapping me," Luisa gasped. "We are protecting you," Lorenzo corrected. He reached out and took her arm. His grip was firm, electric. "You belong to the family now, Luisa, whether you want to or not." Crash! The front window of the restaurant shattered as a bullet tore through the glass, slamming into the wall, inches from Salvatore's head. "Get down!" Lorenzo screamed, tackling Luisa to the floor. More shots erupted, turning the elegant dining room into a war zone. Glass flew everywhere. Lorenzo covered Luisa's body with his own, shielding her from the debris. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, steady and furious. "They found us!" Salvatore shouted, overturning the heavy oak table to use as a barricade. He pulled a silver pistol from his jacket with surprising speed. Lorenzo pulled his own weapon, a sleek black handgun. He looked down at Luisa, his face inches from hers. "Stay down. Do not move." "Who is it?" Luisa screamed over the noise of gunfire. "I don't know," Lorenzo growled, his eyes scanning the shattered windows. "But whoever they are, they just made the last mistake of their lives." He looked at his father. "Cover me. I'm getting her to the back exit." "Go!" Salvatore yelled, firing 2 shots towards the street. Lorenzo grabbed Luisa's hand. "Run!" They sprinted toward the kitchen bullets, nipping at their heels. Luisa Russo's life as a shy waitress was over. She was running straight into the fire, hand in hand with the most dangerous man in the city. And the terrifying part wasn't the gunfire. It was the fact that she didn't want to let go of his hand. The black armored SUV tore through the streets of Manhattan, running 3 red lights in a row. Lorenzo drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. In the back seat, Don Salvatore was on the phone, barking orders in a stream of rapid-fire Italian that was too fast for Louisa to catch. Louisa sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling in her lap. She kept looking in the side mirror, expecting to see headlights chasing them, expecting to see muzzle flashes. "Stop shaking," Lorenzo said. He didn't look at her, his eyes scanning the road ahead with predatory focus. "It annoys me." "I was almost shot." Louisa snapped back, the adrenaline overriding her fear of him. "Excuse me if I'm not used to bullet holes in my dinner." Lorenzo glanced at her, a flicker of surprise raising his eyebrow. Most people cowered before him. He wasn't used to sass, especially not from a waitress who looked like a strong gust of wind could knock her over. "You're safe now," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "No one touches you while I am breathing." "Why?" Louisa asked, turning to face him. The dashboard lights cast shadows across his sharp jawline. "Because I'm his granddaughter." "Because you are an asset," Lorenzo corrected coldly, "and because the Don said so." From the back seat, Salvatore ended his call. "It was a hit squad, mercenaries, not locals. Someone paid a lot of money to disrupt my dinner." He leaned forward, wincing as he shifted his bad leg. "Lorenzo, take us to the estate. The penthouse isn't safe." "Already on the way," Lorenzo said. Louisa looked back at the old man. "Sir, Don Moretti, I need to understand. If you are my grandfather—" She hesitated, glancing at Lorenzo. "Does that make him my uncle?" The silence in the car was heavy. Lorenzo let out a short, sharp laugh that lacked any humor. "Do I look like your Uncle Cara?" Lorenzo asked, shifting gears aggressively as they hit the highway. "Lorenzo is not of my blood," Salvatore explained, his voice soft. "Though he is my son in every way that matters. I found him on the streets of Naples when he was 10 years old. He was fighting 3 boys for a piece of bread. He won." Salvatore looked at Lorenzo with pride. "I took him in. I raised him. He is the heir to my empire. But you, Louisa, you are the heir to my history." Louisa felt a strange knot loosen in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but knowing she wasn't related to the man sitting next to her made the electricity she felt when he touched her arm earlier less complicated and more dangerous. "So," Lorenzo set his voice tight, "the sword and the blood. I am the weapon, and you are the legacy. A perfect little fairy tale." There was bitterness in his tone. Louisa realized suddenly that her existence threatened him. He had spent his life earning his place. She had just walked in and claimed a piece of it by accident. "I don't want anything," Louisa whispered. "I don't want your money. I don't want your empire. I just want to go back to my apartment and feed my cat." "Your cat will be retrieved," Lorenzo said dismissively. "Your apartment is compromised. If they know who you are, they know where you live. You are a ghost now, Louisa. The waitress Louisa is dead. You are Louisa Moretti now." "Russo," she corrected stubbornly. "My name is Louisa Russo." Lorenzo slammed on the brakes, swerving the heavy car off the highway and onto a private wooded exit ramp. The sudden motion threw her against the seatbelt. He brought the car to a stop at a massive iron gate. He turned to her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. "Russo was a name your grandmother used to hide," Lorenzo said, leaning in close. He smelled of leather and gunpowder. "Moretti is a name that commands armies. If you want to survive the week, You better start acting like a Moretti. That means you don't cower, you don't beg, and you definitely don't ask to go back to a studio apartment in Queens when there is a bounty on your head." The gate groaned open. Lorenzo hit the gas and they drove up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. At the top of the hill stood the estate, a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Floodlights washed over the grounds, revealing armed guards patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. "Welcome home, Trottled home, Princess," Lorenzo muttered. They pulled up to the front entrance. Guards swarmed the vehicle, opening the doors. Lorenzo got out first, scanning the darkness before offering a hand to Salvatore. Then he came to Louisa's side. He didn't open the door for her. He just stood there, waiting. Louisa opened her own door and stepped out. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "I can open my own door." Lorenzo's lips quirked up in the faintest ghost of a smile. "Good. Keep that fire. You're going to need it." Inside the mansion was a museum of wealth. Marble floors, oil paintings that belonged in the Louvre, and a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. But it felt cold, empty. "Vinny," Lorenzo barked at the head of security, the man who had laughed at the restaurant earlier. "Lockdown mode. Level 5. No one in or out without my direct authorization. If a squirrel crosses the lawn, I want to know about it." "Yes, boss," Vinny said, his eyes darting briefly to Louisa. There was something in his look, a curiosity mixed with something darker, that made Louisa shiver. "Take her to the East Wing." Lorenzo ordered a maid who had appeared from the shadows. "Get her clothes, get her food, and burn that waitress uniform." "Wait," Louisa said, reaching out to grab Lorenzo's sleeve. He stopped, looking down at her hand on his suit jacket. His muscles tensed under the fabric. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. Lorenzo looked at her, his expression unreadable. He reached out his thumb, brushing against her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of dirt. The touch was startlingly gentle for a man who had just outrun a hit squad. "Now," Lorenzo said softly, "we find out who betrayed us, and then I paint the city red with their blood." He pulled away, turned on his heel, and marched toward his father's study, leaving Louisa standing alone in the grand foyer, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. The room they gave her was bigger than her entire apartment. It had a 4-poster bed draped in silk, a balcony overlooking the dark forest, and a bathroom filled with products that cost more than her monthly salary. Louisa stood under the hot shower for 20 minutes, trying to scrub the smell of fear off her skin. She watched the water swirl down the drain, wishing her problems could disappear as easily. When she stepped out, wrapped in a plush white robe, there were clothes laid out on the bed. Not a uniform. A soft cashmere sweater in charcoal grey and black fitted trousers. They were simple, elegant, and clearly expensive. She dressed feeling like an imposter in her own body. She walked to the mirror. The shy girl from Vino and Verita was gone. In her place was a woman with dark circles under her eyes, but a set to her jaw that looked painfully like the old man's downstairs. Blood does not become water. She left the room. The hallway was quiet. She needed answers. She needed to know why her dialect, just words her nonna used to sing to her, had caused such chaos. She wandered down the grand staircase, following the sound of voices. She reached the heavy oak doors of the study. They were slightly ajar. "It's impossible, Father," Lorenzo's voice was arguing. "The encryption is biometric, or it requires a key, a dialect." It sounds like a myth. It is not a myth. Salvatore's voice was weary. The Cosa Nostra of the 1970s was different. We didn't use computers. We used blood and tradition. The accounts in Zurich, the ones holding the deeds to the port of Palermo. They were sealed by my father using the voice of the valley. It's a voice recognition lock, Lorenzo. Analog. Ancient. It responds only to the specific intonation of the Corleone dialect spoken by a member of the bloodline. Louisa held her breath. I lost the access when Isabella left, Salvatore continued. I never taught you the dialect because it was too dangerous, and my own accent, it has faded. I tried to access the accounts 10 years ago. It rejected me. So she is the key, Lorenzo said. His voice was calculating. She walks into the bank, speaks the words, and unlocks $10 billion in assets. And the proof of the Russian alliance, Salvatore added. That is what they really want. The documents inside that vault will prove the Genovese family sold out to the Russian Bratva. If we get that proof, the Commission will sanction the destruction of the Genovese. We win the war. Louisa leaned against the doorframe, her heart pounding. She wasn't just a granddaughter. She was a walking key to a billion-dollar fortune and a war-ending weapon. She's a liability, Lorenzo said. If the Russians know what she is, they won't kill her. They'll take her. They'll torture her until she speaks the words for them. Then you must ensure they never get the chance, Salvatore said sternly. You will be her shadow, Lorenzo. You will sleep outside her door if you have to. I don't babysit, Lorenzo growled. No. You protect what is ours. Louisa stepped back, a floorboard creaking loudly under her foot. The voices stopped instantly. In a split second, the door was ripped open. Lorenzo stood there, his gun already halfway drawn, before he registered who it was. He lowered the weapon, but his eyes were blazing. Eavesdropping, Lorenzo said, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the room. A dangerous habit. I have a right to know why people are shooting at me, Louisa said, pulling her arm free. She looked at Salvatore, who was sitting behind a massive desk, sipping brandy. You want me to open a bank account? That's it. It is not just a bank account, Picciarida, Salvatore said. It is the legacy of our family, and the only way to ensure our survival. And if I refuse? Louisa asked. Lorenzo stepped into her personal space. He towered over her, his presence overwhelming. You don't get to refuse. You are in the game now. You can either play or you can be a pawn that gets sacrificed. I am not a pawn, Louisa said, poking him in the chest. It was a reckless move. His chest was as hard as a rock. Lorenzo looked down at her finger, then back up to her eyes. The anger in his gaze shifted, turning into something hotter. The tension in the room spiked. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was chemistry. Raw, volatile attraction. Then prove it, Lorenzo whispered. Suddenly the lights in the mansion flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness. Down, Lorenzo roared. He tackled Louisa again, sending them both crashing onto the Persian rug behind the heavy desk. Emergency lights, Salvatore yelled. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a sinister glow. The power was cut, Lorenzo hissed. His body pressed over Louisa's. She could feel the gun in his shoulder holster digging into her chest. Someone bypassed the perimeter. Vinny, Salvatore asked. Vinny manages the grid, Lorenzo said, the realization dawning on him. He didn't just laugh at the restaurant. He texted someone. The traitor wasn't a stranger. It was the head of security. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the study. Heavy, tactical boots. "Stay here," Lorenzo commanded Louisa. He pulled a second gun from an ankle holster and pressed it into her hand. The metal was cold and heavy. I don't know how to use this," Louisa stammered, her hands shaking. Lorenzo grabbed her hand, wrapping her fingers around the grip. He leaned in his lips, brushing her ear. "Point. Pull. Don't hesitate. If anyone comes through that door, and it isn't me, you kill them." He looked at her one last time, an intensity in his eyes that burned her soul. "Survive, Louisa." Lorenzo vaulted over the desk and disappeared into the shadowed hallway. Gunfire erupted immediately outside the door. Deafening rapid shots. Louisa curled up under the desk, clutching the gun. She looked at Salvatore. The old lion was loading a revolver with calm, steady hands. "Welcome to the family, Louisa," Salvatore said grimly. Louisa realized then that the wine and the apron were a lifetime away. She tightened her grip on the gun. Lorenzo was out there fighting for them. The least she could do was be ready. But as the door handle to the study slowly began to turn, Louisa realized the threat wasn't just in the hallway. It was right here. The brass handle of the study door turned slowly, the mechanism clicking in the silence between heartbeats. The red emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the room, turning the familiar furniture into lurking monsters. Louisa gripped the heavy pistol with both hands, her knuckles white. She was trembling, but she didn't drop the gun. She pointed it at the door, just as Lorenzo had shown her. "Point. Pull." The door swung open. A figure stood there, silhouetted by the muzzle flashes from the hallway. It was a man in tactical gear, his face covered by a balaclava. He wasn't Lorenzo. He raised his rifle. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but it didn't come from Louisa's gun. Don Salvatore, seated in his chair, had fired his revolver. The kickback jerked his arm up, but his aim was true. The mercenary crumpled to the floor, clutching his chest. "Reloading." Salvatore rasped his hands, shaking not from fear but from age and the adrenaline dump. He cracked the cylinder open, dumping the spent shell. "There's another one," Louisa screamed. A second mercenary stepped over the fallen body, his weapon raised toward the desk. He didn't care about the old man. His laser sight swept the room and locked onto Louisa's chest. Louisa froze. Her brain screamed at her finger to pull the trigger, but her muscles were locked in terror. She stared into the black barrel of the rifle, knowing she was about to die. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway. Lorenzo. He moved with a violence that was terrifying to behold. He didn't shoot. He was too close. He slammed into the mercenary from behind, driving a combat knife into the gap between the man's body armor and helmet. The mercenary dropped without a sound. Lorenzo shoved the body aside and kicked the door shut, locking it. He turned to them, his chest heaving, his pristine white shirt now splattered with red. He had a cut above his eyebrow that was bleeding freely, running down his face like war paint. "Are you hit?" Lorenzo demanded, rushing to Louisa. He grabbed her shoulders, checking her frantically. No," Louisa gasped. "I didn't shoot. I couldn't do it." "You're alive. That's all that matters," Lorenzo said, his voice rough. He looked at his father. "We have to move. The east wing is overrun. They have at least 20 men. Vinny let them in through the delivery bay." "The panic room?" Salvatore asked, snapping the revolver shut. "Compromised," Lorenzo spat. "Vinny knows the codes. He knows the layout. If we go to the bunker, we trap ourselves in a concrete coffin. We have to get to the garage. I have the armored sedan prepped." "The tunnels," Salvatore said. Louisa looked between them. "Tunnels! Prohibition tunnels, Lorenzo explained, grabbing Louisa's hand. They run under the foundation to the stables. It's the only way out. He dragged the heavy oak desk aside with a grunt of exertion, revealing a section of the floor that looked seamless. He pried up a panel, revealing a dark, musty staircase, spiraling down into the earth. "Ladies first," Lorenzo said, urging Louisa toward the hole. "What about him?" Louisa pointed at Salvatore. The old man was struggling to stand, his bad leg giving out. "I will slow you down," Salvatore said, sinking back into his chair. He looked at Lorenzo with a grim smile. "Go. Take the girl. Keep the legacy safe. I will hold them here." "No," Lorenzo said instantly. "I am not leaving you." "Lorenzo, that is an order." "I don't care." Lorenzo shouted, his voice cracking. For the first time, the mask of the cold Mafia prince slipped, revealing a terrified son. "I am not leaving my father to die like a dog." The door handle rattled violently. Someone was kicking it from the other side. "Get up!" Louisa yelled. She surprised herself. She grabbed Salvatore's arm and hauled him up with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "We are going, all of us move." She glared at Lorenzo. "Help him!" Lorenzo stared at her for a split second, stunned by her command. Then he nodded, grabbing Salvatore's other arm. Together, they practically carried the old man down the stairs. Lorenzo pulled the floor panel back into place, just as the study door splintered open above them. They were plunged into total darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and mold. "Phone light," Lorenzo whispered. "Keep it low." Louisa fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow brick tunnel lined with cobwebs. "It's a half-mile to the stables," Lorenzo said, supporting his father's weight. "Stay behind me. If you see anything move, you shoot. Do you understand, Louisa? No hesitation this time." "I understand," Louisa whispered. She gripped the gun tighter. The fear was still there, but it was hardening into something cold and sharp. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a survivor. They moved as fast as they could, the sound of their breathing loud in the confined space. Above them they could hear the faint thud of boots running across the floorboards. The enemy was searching. They reached a heavy iron door at the end of the tunnel. Lorenzo held up a hand, signaling for silence. He pressed his ear to the metal. "Quiet," he mouthed. He slowly turned the wheel on the door. It groaned, the rust protesting. He pushed it open just a crack. The smell of hay and horses drifted in. The stables. Lorenzo pushed the door open and stepped out, gun raised. "Clear." They helped Salvatore out into the main barn. The horses were restless, whinnying in their stalls, sensing the danger. "The sedan is in the back bay," Lorenzo said. "Come on." They were halfway across the stable floor when the floodlights suddenly snapped on, blinding them. "Going somewhere, boss!" Lorenzo froze. He pushed Louisa and Salvatore behind him. Standing by the exit, flanked by 4 heavily armed mercenaries, was Vinny. The head of security was smiling, chewing on a toothpick. He held a submachine gun casually at his hip. "Vinny," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly calm. "I should have killed you when I caught you skimming off the casino profits last year." "You should have," Vinny agreed. "But you have a soft spot for strays, don't you, Lorenzo? Just like your old man." Vinny's eyes shifted to Louisa. "And look at the new stray, the billion-dollar girl. The Russians are very eager to meet you, sweetheart." "Why?" Louisa stepped out from behind Lorenzo. "Why are you doing this?" "Business, doll." Vinny shrugged. "The Moretti family is a sinking ship. The Don is old. Lorenzo is too busy playing businessman to be a real gangster. The Genovese offered me 10 million to hand you over. 10 million buys a lot of loyalty." "You're scum," Lorenzo spat. "I'm rich scum." Vinny laughed. He raised his gun. "Kill the men. Keep the girl alive. Leg shots only." Time seemed to slow down. Louisa saw the mercenaries' fingers tightening on their triggers. She saw Lorenzo tense up, preparing to throw himself in front of her. He was going to die. He was going to die protecting her, just like her grandmother had feared. No. Louisa's eyes darted to the side. Next to her was a stall housing Diablo, a massive temperamental black stallion that Lorenzo rode. The stall door was latched, but the pin was loose. Louisa had noticed it when they walked in a waitress's habit of noticing small details like a wobbly table leg. As Vinny opened his mouth to give the fire order, Louisa didn't scream. She didn't cry. She lunged to the side and kicked the latch pin out. She slapped the stallion's flank as hard as she could. "Vai! Go!" The stallion, already spooked by the lights and the aggression, exploded out of the stall. It was 1,200 pounds of panicked muscle. Diablo charged straight at the mercenaries, bucking and kicking. "Hold fire!" Vinny screamed, diving out of the way of the flailing hooves. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries scattered to avoid being trampled. "Now!" Lorenzo yelled. He didn't waste the distraction. He raised his weapon and fired 2 precise shots. 2 mercenaries dropped. Vinny scrambled to his feet, raising his submachine gun. He aimed at Lorenzo's back. "Lorenzo!" Louisa shrieked. She raised the heavy pistol. She didn't think about the morality. She didn't think about fear. She thought about the man who had held her hand in the car. She thought about the only family she had left. She pointed. She pulled. The gun kicked violently, nearly flying out of her hand. The shot went wide, shattering a window above Vinny's head, but it forced Vinny to flinch. He turned his aim toward Louisa. That split second was all Lorenzo needed. Lorenzo crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He knocked the gun from Vinny's hands with a brutal swipe of his pistol barrel. Vinny stumbled back, pulling a knife from his belt. "Come on then, pretty boy." Lorenzo holstered his gun. He didn't want to shoot Vinny. He wanted to break him. "For my father," Lorenzo snarled, dodging Vinny's slash and landing a sickening punch to Vinny's ribs. "For the family," Vinny gasped, swinging wildly. Lorenzo caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped and drove his knee into Vinny's solar plexus. Vinny collapsed to the dirt, gasping for air, clutching his broken arm. Lorenzo stood over him, breathing hard. He pulled his gun back out and aimed it at Vinny's head. "Wait!" Vinny wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Wait, you kill me, you never find the bomb." The silence in the stable was absolute. Even the horses seemed to freeze. "What bomb?" Salvatore asked, limping forward, leaning on a pitchfork for support. "The car," Vinny grinned, his teeth stained red. "The armored sedan. You think I'd let you escape? I rigged the ignition. You turn the key, you all go boom." Lorenzo's face went pale. That was exactly where they were heading. If Louisa hadn't released the horse, if they had just run for the car. "Where are the others?" Lorenzo pressed the gun to Vinny's forehead. "Where is the extraction team?" "They're waiting at the airfield." Vinny coughed. "The Russians. They have a pilot ready to fly the girl to Moscow. They don't just want the accounts, Lorenzo. They want the list." "The list?" Louisa asked. "The compromat," Salvatore said, his voice grim. "The blackmail files my father kept on half the governments in Europe. That is what lies in the vault. That is what your voice protects, Louisa. If the Russians get that, they control NATO. Vinny laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. She's not a waitress. She's a nuclear weapon. And you can't protect her, Lorenzo. The Genovese are coming. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Lorenzo looked at Vinny with cold detachment. You're right. I can't protect her here. So let's make a deal, Vinny begged. I can get you out. I know the bang. Lorenzo fired. Vinny slumped back into the hay silence, reclaiming the barn. Lorenzo didn't look away. He holstered his weapon and turned to Louisa. His eyes were dark, filled with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. He walked over to her. Louisa was shaking again, the reality of what she had almost done crashing down on her. She had shot at a man. She had watched a man die. Louisa, Lorenzo said softly. He reached out his hands, cupping her face. He forced her to look at him. You saved us, he said, intense sincerity. That horse. That was brilliant. I missed, Louisa whispered, tears spilling over. I tried to shoot him and I missed. You bought me time, Lorenzo said. That is all that matters. He leaned his forehead against hers. For a moment, amidst the dead bodies and the smell of gunpowder, the world narrowed down to just the two of them. Louisa felt his breath on her skin, ragged and hot. She felt the frantic beat of his heart against her chest. We have to go, Salvatore interrupted gently. He said 5 minutes. We have 2 left. Lorenzo pulled back his eyes, searching Louisa's one last time. The sedan is rigged. We take the truck. The old farm truck in the back. It has no electronics. Vinny wouldn't have bothered with it. Where do we go? Louisa asked, wiping her tears. If the airfield is compromised and the house is gone. Lorenzo looked toward the heavy wooden doors of the barn. Beyond them lay the dark forest, and beyond that the road. We go to the only place they won't look, Lorenzo said. We go to Little Italy, to the old neighborhood, to the basement of Vino and Verita. Louisa's eyes widened. Back to the restaurant. It's the last place they'll expect us to be, Lorenzo said, and it's the only place where I can make the call to the one man who hates the Russians more than we do. Who? Salvatore asked. The capo of the Irish mob, Lorenzo said grimly. We're going to start a war, father, and we're going to win it. Lorenzo grabbed Louisa's hand. Ready? Louisa looked at her hand in his. It was bloody, dirty and trembling, but his grip was iron. Ready, she said. And as they ran toward the rusted farm truck, Louisa Russo left the last of her fear in the dust. The shy waitress was gone. The Mafia princess had arrived. The rusted Ford farm truck rattled violently as it bounced over the cobblestones of Mulberry Street. It was 3 a.m, and a thick fog had rolled in off the Hudson, blanketing Little Italy in a ghostly silence. Lorenzo killed the headlights as they drifted into the alley behind Vino and Verita. The restaurant was dark, the windows still boarded up from a renovation that had served as a front for years. Inside, Lorenzo ordered, his voice tight. Move! They moved like phantoms through the back entrance. The kitchen was cold, smelling faintly of the spilled Chianti from the disastrous dinner service just hours ago. Lorenzo didn't stop. He led them to the pantry, shoved a heavy shelving unit aside, and punched a code into a hidden keypad. A section of the wall hissed open, revealing a steel staircase. They descended into the true heart of the Moretti operation, a high-tech bunker buried beneath the wine cellar. Banks of monitors lined the walls, casting a blue glow over Giovanni, the restaurant owner, who was pacing nervously in his pajamas. Don Salvatore, Giovanni gasped, clutching his rosary. I heard the shooting. I thought the family was finished. Not yet, Salvatore said, sinking into a leather chair, his face grey with exhaustion. "Get me a secure line." "Call Liam O'Connor," Lorenzo barked, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Giovanni's eyes widened. "The butcher of Hell's Kitchen." "You want to call the Irish? Do it." Moments later, a gravelly voice filled the room via speakerphone. "Moretti, I heard you were dead. I was about to pour a whiskey to celebrate." "Save the drink, Liam," Lorenzo said coolly. "I have a proposition. The Russians are moving on us. They have a bounty on our heads. Help us crush them, and I give you the port of Newark." There was a heavy silence. The port was the crown jewel of the underworld. "You're bluffing," Liam scoffed. "You can't sign over the unions. Your accounts are frozen in Zurich. Everyone knows the Moretti fortune is locked behind a ghost." "It was locked," Lorenzo said, his eyes locking onto Louisa's. "Until tonight. The ghost is in the room." He handed Louisa a headset connected to the secure server. "Do it, Louisa, just like we practiced." Louisa took the headset. Her hands were trembling, but as she looked at the monitors, showing the dark street above, a strange calm settled over her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the granddaughter of a king. She dialed the Zurich bank. The automated system picked up. "Identify." Louisa closed her eyes. She let the American accent slip away. She channeled the voice of her nonna, the rhythm of a village she had never seen, but always known. "Lu sangu chiama lu sangu, li radici su profuninta la terra niura." Blood calls to blood. The roots are deep in the black earth. The room held its breath. "Voice print confirmed," a human voice finally responded. "Welcome heir of Corleone. Access granted. Current balance, $4,200,000,000. Louisa typed in the account number Lorenzo had written down. "Transferring $5 million to O'Connor Enterprises." A green light flashed on the screen. "Transfer complete." "Liam?" Lorenzo asked. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." Liam breathed. "The money is there. You actually have her. Do we have a deal?" "You have an army," Liam growled. "Sit tight. The Irish are coming to Little Italy." The battle that followed was short and brutal. Within the hour, 50 of Liam's toughest enforcers swept through the streets. The Russian mercenaries, expecting a defenseless old man and a waitress, were caught in a hammer and anvil strike. By sunrise, the Genovese soldiers had fled, and the streets were quiet once more. As the morning light filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows, the adrenaline finally faded. Lorenzo walked over to Louisa, who was sitting at a small table in the corner of the bunker. She looked exhausted, her expensive clothes ruined dirt smudged on her cheek. "You did it," Lorenzo said softly. "Did it," Louisa corrected. She looked up at him. "So what now? Do I disappear? Do I go buy an island and hide for the rest of my life?" Lorenzo reached out, taking her hand. His grip was warm, possessive. "You have the money now. You could leave. You could never see me or this violent life again." Louisa looked at their joined hands. She thought about her lonely apartment in Queens. She thought about the fear she used to live with. Then she looked at Lorenzo, the man who had stood between her and a bullet, the man whose eyes burned with a dark, intense fire she had never found in anyone else. "I don't want an island," Louisa whispered, standing up to meet his gaze. "What do you want?" Lorenzo asked, his voice dropping to a murmur. "I want to know why you looked at me like that in the study," she said boldly, "before the lights went out." Lorenzo smiled, a real rare smile. "I looked at you like that because for the first time, I met someone who didn't just survive the fire. You walked right into it. He pulled her close, his hand tangling in her hair. Stay, Louisa. Stay and rule this city with me. Is that a command, boss? She teased. It's a plea, he whispered. He kissed her, then a kiss that tasted of danger and promise. It was the end of the shy waitress and the beginning of the queen. 3 months later, the reopening of Vino and Verita was the event of the season. The paparazzi were outside, but inside Louisa moved through the crowd with grace. She wore a stunning red dress, her head held high. Everything is secure, Lorenzo whispered, stepping up behind her, his hand resting on the small of her back. The Russians are gone. The family is safe. Louisa leaned back against him, smiling at the guests, who had no idea that the woman serving the best wine in New York held the keys to the underworld. You look beautiful, Lorenzo murmured, but be careful you're smiling too much. Louisa turned, rising on her tiptoes, to whisper in his ear, using the dialect that was now their secret language. Tu si lume cori, Lorenzo. You are my heart, Lorenzo. Lorenzo kissed her forehead as the cameras flashed. The world saw a beautiful couple. Only they knew the truth. They were the sword and the shield, and they were untouchable. And that is how a shy waitress turned a spilled glass of wine into $1 billion empire. Louisa didn't just survive the mafia. She reinvented it. Her story proves that sometimes the things we hide, our history, our voice, our heritage, are actually our greatest superpowers. Now I have a question for you. If you were in Louisa's shoes and unlocked that bank account, be honest, would you have stayed to rule the city with Lorenzo? Or would you have taken the $4 billion and disappeared to a private island? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of forbidden romance and high-stakes betrayal, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow so I can keep bringing you these dramatic stories. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. We have a dark billionaire revenge story coming next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.